Hey guys, it's Cindy here, the LD educator, and as you know, I am a special education teacher. In this video, I wanted to share what my distance learning virtual classroom looks like. Recently, we invited a guest to share his experience of being in the Vietnam War. As you can see, I have a guest here. Anyway, I'm not gonna be really long because it is really long. However, I thought it would be awesome to share with you because having firsthand experience or being told stories firsthand from that time period really helped to cement that period and how soldiers felt from that time. So I encourage all you teachers and even parents, this is a perfect time to expose your students to experts or people who have first-time knowledge. We're all at home for the most part, still sheltering in place. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who would be willing to join your classroom to talk to your students. So do not miss out on that resource that is probably so much easier to coordinate now with the way that circumstances are. So enjoy my distance learning virtual classroom. What I will do, my students all ask questions. So because it's a bit long, what I will do is actually write their questions out with a timestamp. Eventually, I know this is something that I will use to refer back to for probably years to come. So for all you history teachers and history buffs, even literature, this could definitely be a resource that helps to cement learning for your students. All right, enjoy.
As you guys know, the workshop that we're working on and reading is entitled Combat Zone. And we've been reading about a soldier who was in the Vietnam War. We found out that one of our classmates' grandfather also was a soldier in the Vietnam War. So I thought it would be really, really interesting for you guys to sit down, chit chat with him, and then we're going to get to compare his experience being in Vietnam with the experience of the author. So we're going to start out by just letting Mr. Fawcett share with us anything that he would like to tell us about his experience in Vietnam. And then after that, we're going to all ask questions. So I want us to make sure you're looking in the camera, that we are being attentive, and that, like in all things, you are paying attention, and you are paying attention with your physical body, all right? So that means we're not going to be looking like this or doing like this. We're going to sit up, and we're going to listen, and then we're going to interact. All right, Mr. Fawcett, you're on, sir.
Okay, can everybody hear me, first of all?
Yes, you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay. One thing, I was an airman and not a soldier. There's a difference, and there's a little friendly rivalry between the different services as far as the military is concerned. You have the Air Force, Navy, Army, and Marines. Those are the four branches of service. Let's start a little bit about the location of Vietnam. Where is Vietnam located? It's located in Asia, right next to China. Okay. What were some of the? When did it start? First of all, let's start off with when did the Vietnam War start? It started there's some debate about when it started, but roughly, let's say it started 1958, 1960, and the Vietnam War ended in 1973. Okay. Now, when the Vietnam War first started, Vietnam was one country, and there was a war that divided Vietnam into North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Now, when the war started, the U.S. entered the war on the side of the South Vietnamese. The countries helping the North Vietnamese was China and Russia. Okay. Now, the Vietnam War ended in 1973 during the presidency of Richard Nixon. Now, my role in it was, well, first of all, I finished high school and went to college. And I finished college when I was 22 years old, and I was commissioned in the Air Force and went to navigation training how to direct airplanes. And I was assigned as a electronic warfare officer on a part of a B-52 crew. B-52 is a big airplane with 8 engines. It has 4 engines on each side. And underneath the airplane is called the bomb bay. And that's where the bombs are located. The airplane was designed to drop bombs. And underneath the airplane is the bomb bay, and the doors open and bombs come out the bay. It also has bombs underneath each wing. So what my role in the airplane was, I was the person that prevented the airplane from being shot down. There was missiles that was being shot at the airplane, my airplane. And by the way, I flew over 150 combat missions during Vietnam. Okay, let's see. Okay, I flew over 150 combat missions in Vietnam. The Vietnam War, it was it ended when the U.S. signed a peace treaty in 1973. There's been some debate as to who won the war. But when the war finally ended, Vietnam, initially it was one country, then they started fighting. The North Vietnamese was fighting the South Vietnamese. The United States entered the war on the side of the South Vietnamese. And when the U.S. withdrew from the war in 1973, the North Vietnamese took over the South. And now it's just one country, and it's called one country, Vietnam, and the capital is called Hanoi, which is the largest city in Vietnam. So now I'm open for any questions that you might have.
I have a question.
Yes.
Was you in the, I'm not really sure, was you in the military? Does you mean when you say a soldier, does that mean that you was in the military?
Well, the military consists of, the U.S. military consists of the U.S. Army, which are soldiers, okay? The U.S. Navy, and they're on ships. The soldiers are typically on the ground. The Navy is in ships on the ocean. The Air Force fly on airplanes in the sky. And also the Marines, which is a part of the Navy, and they're on the ground. So universally, we're all considered to be soldiers, but different branches.
So what would you name yourself?
Excuse me?
What would you name yourself? Like, was
What
you
branch of Army?
Yeah, I was an airman.
I mean, not Army, of military.
Yeah, I was an airman in the U.S. Air Force.
So he flew the planes, or he was involved in that. So, and I misspoke when I said, I guess, soldier, because I was more so referring to the Army, but that's not the branch that he works with. He works with the aircrafts, okay? And so like Ashanti's sister, she is a sailor. So she's in the Navy. They're on water, and then you have the Army and Marines. And I guess the Marines do a little bit of, but they are generally on ground, right, Mr. Fawcett?
Yeah, they're attached to the Navy. They do the Navy's ground fighting, but they're part of the Navy.
All right. So that was an excellent question, Tatiana. Make sure you go back on mute. Dazon, your go.
Did you ever kill anyone?
It's hard to say because I'm sure that some people died, because every mission we flew on, we dropped bombs. And my airplane was flying at maybe 30 or 40,000 feet in the air, and we dropped plenty of bombs. I'm sure that some of the soldiers died because after we dropped bombs, that go out and look for bodies, and they found plenty of them.
Okay,
So,
and how did you like the food in the Army?
Air Force.
I'm at Air Force.
yeah, now when I was deciding, when I graduated from college and was commissioned as an officer in the Air Force, one of the reasons why I decided to go in the Air Force instead of the Army was I was told that the Army, they go out in the field and sleep on the ground and eat cold food. And I was told that the Air Force, you were guaranteed to sleep in a warm bed every night and had hot food. So that was enough to convince me that I wanted to be an airman instead of an Army person on the ground. So I was an airman and not a soldier. There's a lot of competition between the different services. And the Army think they're better than the Navy, and the Navy think they're better than the Air Force, and Marines think they're better than everybody. So there's a lot of competition between the soldiers. But the Army to be soldiers.
Okay. Awesome question. I think I would prefer to be in the Air Force or the Navy myself.
Yes.
Yes. I hear the Army has it hard.
Yes.
Did you have boot camp?
Let's talk about enlisted people as opposed to officers. The enlisted people, they're the ones that go through boot camp and go through training. They're the ones that typically in the Army, they're the ones that carry the guns on the shoulders. And they're the ones that involved in a lot of face-to-face and hand-to-hand combat. And there's enlisted as officers, okay? Officers are the one that you see walking around with bars on the shoulders, and enlisted people typically have stripes on their arms. That's how you can tell the difference.
And so you are an officer?
Yes.
Yes. And was that because you had already gone to college and gotten a degree?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Back in the 60s, they had something called the draft. I don't know if you've heard about that or not. It's a part of Selective Service, and I think still today you have to register for the Selective Service, although it's although today it's an all volunteer army today. You have to volunteer, and it's but when I was going in, you were drafted. So when you finish college, when you finish high school, if you didn't go to college, you had to go to the draft board, and they were to decide whether they wanted you to enlist or not. So when I finished, I went to college, so I got something called a deferment. In other words, my time in service was deferred until after I finished college. So if you wanted to do something other than being an enlisted man and carry a gun on your shoulder, typically you had to go to college.
And I don't know if you guys made any connections, but here's the thing. It sounds like to me, if you're interested in a career in the military, go to college, then go in, because it sounds like you go in at a higher rank.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
you go in as an officer as opposed to an enlisted man. The officers are the ones that give the orders to the enlisted people and tell them what to do. So
yeah. See,
yeah,
you
it's
be
a better life.
Real boss.
It's a better life, yeah. Back to the warm bed and hot food. Yeah.
All right, Ashanti, I know you have some questions prepared. How are you, ma'am?
Good. My first question was, when was your first war?
First war? My first and only war was the Vietnam War. That's the only one I had any participation in. And my time in service was from 1965 to 1970. I spent 5 years there. So Vietnam was the only war I had any association with or participation in.
Is there a process to start the war?
A process to start the war? Wars typically start when there's some sort of a disagreement between two countries. And the disagreement could be over boundaries between the two countries, or maybe like if we go back and take a look at the history of Vietnam, Vietnam was a colony of the French. In other words, France, which is a country in Europe, colonized Vietnam. They were running the country. The Vietnamese people rebelled against the French and started fighting the French. When the U.S. entered the war on the side of the French and the South Vietnamese, and the Russians and the Chinese entered the war on the side of the North Vietnam. And so there were two countries when the Vietnam War really started: South Vietnam and North Vietnam. South Vietnam capital was in Saigon, and the North Vietnamese capital was in Hanoi. And so when the war ended, the North Vietnamese took over the entire country. So now there's just one country called Vietnam, and the capital is Hanoi. And it's and there's some debate of whether it's a communist country or not. I don't think so, not right now. But I guess the North Vietnamese really, if you consider, they took over the country, so now they're running the entire country now.
Did you had a hard time in the Vietnam War?
Did I have a what time?
A hard time in the Vietnam War?
A hard time?
Yes.
You said hard time?
Yes.
There were some things I didn't like. Some things I didn't like. You're probably too young for this, but back during the 60s and the 70s, there was a lot of protests against the war in Vietnam. A lot of protests. People were out in the streets protesting the war. Didn't think the war was justified, and so a lot of people took it out on some of the soldiers. When they see soldiers walk through the airport, they weren't very happy to see soldiers, and it was a big protest against the Vietnam War. I didn't like being separated from my family, but I saw that as being my duty, something that my country called me to do, and I had to do it.
Yeah, I have a question before Ryland gets to ask his question. You mentioned about the draft, and then you kind of talked to us about how society viewed the war. Now, and hopefully you feel comfortable asking this, and obviously no right or wrong answers, but I would love to know from a first person's perspective, how you felt. Muhammad Ali has been this great icon in our community, and he stood up to the draft and ended up choosing to go to jail. How did those types of decisions impact you as someone who felt like it was my duty, I'm gonna do it, but for someone like him who felt like it ain't my duty and I'm not gonna do it?
Yeah. Well, the draft was I don't think it was a fair draft, because typically, if your dad was a politician or had some connections, you were able to get deferments a lot easier than somebody who did not have those connections from a poor family, as opposed to somebody being from a rich family or whose dad was a senator. You could get deferment after deferment and never went. And most of the people that came from poor families, black and white, they were the ones that were sent overseas to fight. And a lot of the rich people with connections were able to escape going to the army, escape going to the draft. So it wasn't a fair system. So I was glad when they decided to stop the draft.
What made you decide to be in the war?
Well, when I finished high school and I went off going off to college. The war was going on. War was going on. There was a draft going on. So there was no way to escape not going to the Army if you were drafted, unless you were able to get a deferment. Now the deferment was because maybe you had some physical problem. If you were had some disability, you were able to get a deferment. If you were married and had children, you were able to get a deferment. But most of the people that came from maybe middle class or lower, as far as the family social economic background was concerned, you weren't able to escape the draft. So one way or another, you were going in the draft, and everybody that was drafted, you could almost guarantee that if you were sent to the Army, you were going to go to Vietnam. So that was a way to since you were going to go to the Army or go to the Army or go to the Air Force or go to the Navy. My choice was, I decided the Air Force was the best service of all four, and that was the best one for me to go to. And I had the opportunity to become an officer in the Air Force as opposed to being an enlisted man. So I knew that officers had a better time and were treated better than enlisted people. And the Air Force was a better opportunity, as far as I was concerned, than the Army. So that was a place for me to go. So that's why I decided to do that. It was the best choice of all the bad choices.
Awesome.
But now you don't have to worry about going into the services. There's no longer a draft unless you really want to. It's an all volunteer Army, Air Force, and Navy. They only accept volunteers today.
Didn't you think you might die in the Air Force with the other planes?
Yeah. There were several times that I was really, really scared. We were flying in North Vietnam, and it was my job on the airplane was to prevent missiles from knocking the airplane out of the sky. So with my systems on the airplane, I could see the missile being fired. I could see it lifted up off the ground and headed towards the plane. So it was my responsibility to divert that. There were several times that I was really, really scared. And the airplane that I was on, I was sitting in an ejection seat and had a parachute on. And I'm glad I didn't have to eject. Now, the way that where I was sitting in the airplane, I'm sitting in the top, so if I had to use the ejection seat, I would have went out the top of the plane. There were some people that had ejection seats, and they were sitting underneath me. They'd go out the bottom of the plane if they had to eject. But there were several occasions that it came really, really close. But hopefully, I'm here today, so everything worked out fine. Now, if you notice, the Air Force and the Navy have planes they call fighters, which typically tend to be single engine, single seats or double seat airplanes, and they're the smaller planes, and they have ejection seats too, and airplanes used to engage, and the small planes used to engage in air-to-air combat where two planes are attacking each other, but that's not the case anymore.
When did you retire?
When did I retire? That was the question. I didn't retire. I got out early. I was only in 5 years. You have to stay in at least 20 years in order to retire. That's called early retirement. Typically, people stay in 30 years when they retire. But I only stayed in 5 years. So I didn't retire. I had to get out and find myself a job and go to work. So
I want to know, do you, as someone who experienced the military, would you encourage young people to join any of the military branches, whether it be the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, or the Army?
well, if there's somebody who wants to be a pilot, maybe want a career in the airlines, it's a great way to learn how to fly in the Air Force and the Navy. You could spend 5 years in the Air Force and the Navy, learn how to fly. You can get your flight hours in, get out in 5 or 6 years, and go work for Delta as a pilot for Delta. Mm-hmm. That's how most of the people flying the airplanes today for the airlines. They got their training while they were in the service, either Air Force or Navy, and that's a great way to learn how to fly and be work for the airlines. Which airline pilot is a great job. Mm-hmm. It's a great job.
When you think about your time in Vietnam, and we know the emotional impact sometimes that serving in the armed forces, particularly when you're at war, can do to people, would you classify it as a traumatic event?
Let me say this. In the Army or Marines, I would, because they're the ones that spent their time on the ground in Vietnam, did most of the fighting, and they're the ones that experienced hand-to-hand combat and had some traumatic experiences, and some of those people are still suffering from that today. Some of their experiences while they were in service. So there's something called flashback, where you can even today you can have a flashback and think about something that happened to you while you were in service. There's also something called Agent Orange, which was a chemical that was used to. Vietnam has a lot of jungle and brush, and they would spray this chemical there that would kill all that jungle and brush. So the North Vietnamese weren't able to hide in that jungle and brush. And that's a chemical they got in a lot of the soldiers' bodies and caused them trouble today. But depending on what service you were in, depending on your job, it could be considered to be a traumatic experience. It could be considered to be a life-changing and altering experience.
Okay, guys, are there any?
But I'd recommend the services if anybody wanted, anybody feel the commitment to serve the country. I think the military would be a good way to go if you have that really committed to do that. Okay.
Mr. Foster, I want to tell you, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. I hope our students understand how valuable it is to actually hear these stories firsthand from someone who experienced the war, as opposed it is to reading about it from someone or realistic fiction as we were reading. Thank you for your service. I am appreciative. America is definitely much better off because of brave men and women like you. So once again, thank you so much for coming and talking with us today.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. All right.